Hi everybody, welcome to Leading for Life Stories Season 2. My name is Bob Judson and I'm your host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Thanks very much, and I really hope you enjoy what follows. My guest this week is Matt Lindley. Matt's a fascinating guy. He's had an amazing career and it was a real pleasure to talk to him. He started out as a Royal Air Force pilot, and after flying training became a pilot on 32, the Royal Squadron, where he flew all manner of VIPs, and he'll talk more about that. He then moved to be in the airline world and still remains there as a part-time pilot with one of the major airlines. But alongside that, he runs his own company, and he's a motivational speaker and speaks extensively on diversity issues. Because one of the things about Matt is he was one of the Royal Air Force's first openly gay pilots. Indeed, openly gay officers, full stop. And that obviously is a topic of conversation we cover extensively, because he bridged the period when it was not permissible to be gay in the armed forces. And that was clearly one of the major challenges of his life. It was a fascinating conversation, wholly appropriate that we had a conversation like this at the beginning of what is Pride Month in the UK. And I really hope you enjoy it. It's really interesting to get Matt's very uncoloured, unvarnished insights into what was obviously a very challenging chapter for him, but also the positivity that he radiates and the success with which he's now doing the job he is, where he's really there to raise a platform for a lot of diversity issues in the round. I really hope you enjoy it. Off we go. Hey, Matt, thank you so much for joining me today. It's really great to have you on the podcast. You were an intro to me from Mandy Hickson, who I really enjoyed the conversation with Mandy. And, we've got a lot of common ground, but equally lots of things that I think will be really interesting to discuss. So I'm really glad to have you here.
Oh, it's fantastic to be here. And yeah, Mandy, an old friend. We've gone through a lot. University, flying training, life, everything. We've got drunk many times together. Yeah, I know Mandy very well. Yeah,
no, that was very clear. So no, it's really good to have you as a result of that. But you've had a fascinating career so far, and obviously you've got a lot of it ahead of you yet. But we're going to go into aspects of that in a good deal more detail as we go through this. But I think just to get us started, can you give the listeners a bit of a short summary of your journey to date?
Yeah, of course. From humble background, I am the son of a Yorkshire farmer, a small farm, not sort of a privileged background at all. No connections with the military, no connections with flying whatsoever. Just a normal upbringing, really. Lots of sports, a lovely family. Had a fascination with aeroplanes from apparently the age of 3. If my mum was listening in, she'd say, "Oh yeah, it all happened when we went on a holiday to Malta. Flew through some turbulence. Apparently everybody was anxious. 3-year-old Matt, bouncing around, loving it, got off the airplane and said, 'Mummy, I want to be a pilot.'" And she said, "Yeah, I was expecting it to be a fireman or a soldier next, but here I am, 52, and I'm still persistently talking about flying." So there you go. So I was just fascinated with airplanes and not sure about the Air Force when I was a kid. I was undecided which direction I wanted to pursue. But I went to university and got involved with the good old University Air Squadron. And as we all probably know, what a great organization. Teach like young adults, not just flying, but camaraderie, leadership, just a blooming good organization. And of course, I got hooked on flying then. And really, I made the decision at the end of university. That was it. I was obsessed. I wanted to join the Royal Air Force. And after a very short space of time in industry, working as a consultant, I then got called up by the RAF and they offered me a job as a pilot. So off I jolly well went on a adventure of a lifetime, really. Very, very happy, and went through fast jet training, got my wings on the Hawk, then had a bit of a hiccup in TAC weapons. The Air Force decided that probably wasn't where I was going to end up. Slowed a few things down. And I did really most of my career at RAF Northolt, flying on the Royal Squadron, flying the big wigs around, and became an instructor. So saw my time out in the Air Force on the HS125. Very, very happy there. What a great job. And then decided to leave the Air Force, very happy, very positive, and take a different direction into the airlines, and flown all sorts of things in the airlines. Now I fly the 777 out of London Heathrow. But I've gone progressively part-time and have a company on the side, consulting and keynote speaking. So a lot of variety in there.
Yeah, no kidding. Amazing journey. It was interesting, the TAC weapons hiccup thing, because I think when I went through, it was a while before you clearly, but we were right from the beginning at Linton on us in basic training. It was right, it's fast jet or nothing, because there's no other slots. And we were all kind of really a bit aggrieved about that. And in fact, we started a course with 18 people. We finished with 9. 9 got chopped, which is kind of unheard of in today's world. But of those, a few went navigator and a few went out, and a few went navigator and subsequently went out. So they failed the nav training as well. But, and you could see why later on, because at the end of the day, obviously what they wanted to do is they wanted to hold the multi-engine slots in particular for people just like you, where obviously, you've got someone well through the training system. You've invested a lot in them already. Right now, what can we do with them that finds a way to to put them onto something else? And obviously that's a real bonus, isn't it?
Well, I suppose that's like the big picture you can see in retrospect, but for people going through training at the time, when I think these big changes in the training system, when they affect people's lives, it's tough, isn't it? It's really
tough. I agree. And I think I was talking recently on a podcast to a chap who was one of my instructors when I went through Valley, Nick Anderson, who then went into the airlines and had a very long career with Virgin. He's retired now. But we were talking about that. I think he went back to Valley relatively recently for a kind of commemorative thing, because with another mutual friend of ours who had a bad accident there. A student was killed and he narrowly survived it, very badly injured, but did survive it. They went back and I think they were quite shocked. They went to the mess and, just the kind of lengths of holds and the attitudes of people and the age of people as well, getting through the system, because obviously it's taking a long time, and added to which everyone goes through university and that sort of thing. So it's very different. No question. But it's interesting as well. I think that I was talking to someone very recently about this, where you look at the world through a different set of spectacles, don't you? If you're joining the Air Force or the Army or the Navy today, I think you join with just as much enthusiasm and interest, and you just accept it as it is. I remember when I joined, obviously we were on the back of coming to the end of the Cold War and the back edge of a much, much bigger military in the RAND and many more bases, a lot more overseas basing and that sort of thing. And lots of people are going, oh, it's not like it used to be. And I think it's still like that. I think we tend to kind of take the view that it's not like it used to be.
So, Bob, have we tended to that generation then when we're looking at that retrospectively? Oh no!
I think we're getting close. Yeah, I think we definitely are. How was the transition out from obviously you're in the kind of almost in the airline world when you're doing HS125 stuff and flying around with VIPs, and that transition to the airline world must have been a softer kind of landing, I guess, because it's quite tricky for the fast jet guys that have gone out, particularly recently, where the requirements have changed quite a lot.
Yeah, good question. Because maybe it was a bit arrogant of me, but when I was at Northolt and I was thinking, oh yeah, when I leave, hopefully I'm going to go 4 miles down the road to Heathrow. And how different can it be? We fly civilian aircraft. I was doing that in the Air Force. I'm flying civilian passengers. I'm flying to civilian airports most of the time. I've got a captain, a co-pilot, and a steward. So it can't be that different. But my goodness, it was totally different. And it was even from Northolt, it was a shock to the system. And there were two things that I was really surprised about. And it's well charted by other people, but until you experience it, you don't realize what a shock it is. You go from that small unit of 15, 20 pilots that you've worked with for me, nearly 10 years, that you fly with, you socialize with. They're your talking therapy when things go wrong and your best friends and what have you. Then you go across to the civilian world, and every time you go flying, you're flying with strangers. So you swipe in and you don't know anybody on the crew. You don't know any of the cabin crew. You don't know your other pilots. So that is quite a shock to the system.
Yeah, very much so, I can imagine.
And you have to become quite a chameleon, and you have to kind of adapt your personality very quickly. You have to be very, very sort of pliable in your approach to meeting people. And that's quite a shock. And you were spending long periods of time by yourself as well. So it's quite a solitary lifestyle. So you go from it's, all-encompassing military, great friends, camaraderie, into much more solitary, and you've got to be good with your own company. So that takes a while to get used to. But the other thing I was really surprised about was how they fly airplanes. And now retrospectively, I'm not sure that the way we flew the airplanes in the military very much reflected something you said earlier, in the fact that we went through flying training and we were trained as fast jet pilots. The whole system, quite rightly, is focused in getting people through to the very fastest, best pilots onto the best aircraft to be the most capable. But as a result, I think we flew some of our multi-engine aircraft with a little bit of a legacy of that.
Mm-hmm.
So we weren't as collaborative in the way we made decisions on the flight deck. And we made decisions too quickly, really, unnecessarily quickly. And I do remember my first sort of few simulator checks with the airline, and they were going, Matt, slow down. Talk to your crew.
Have a cup of coffee.
Yeah, have a cup of coffee. So it was a shock to the system, but now I'm well and truly established. I'm really fond memories of the Air Force, really fond memories. But the lifestyle that the airlines offer, and it allows me to do other things, it equally is appealing. So, but both sides of the world have got real merits.
Oh yeah, I can completely see that. I mean, I've got dozens of friends who obviously went Air Force Airlines and then on to either out and on to other things, or did similar to you and are doing other things while they're kind of still in the airline world. And I think it's a great life. I mean, clearly it's I just went, up the greasy pole in the Air Force and got to the point where there was no point. I would have been this sort of junior coffee boy at a rather advanced age if I'd decided to go out and do an ATPL and join the airline. So I decided I wasn't going to do that.
I think also, how did you find it when you left? One thing that struck me was we have status in the military. You wherever you are, you have a pecking order, you have a status. And then when you leave, you lose that. And did you find, Bob, when you left, that all of a sudden life just moves on?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it is interesting because I think some people wear their rank quite lightly if they get to quite senior rank, and some people a lot less so. I was always one of the ones that was reasonably chilled about it. And so I went from the Air Force into Deloitte, kind of, very quickly moved into, do you know what? I use it when it's useful and I don't care about it most of the time. And I really, the interesting thing for me was, when I arrived in Deloitte, which was equally, there was a massive change. Clearly, you come out from, in my case, 34 years in the Air Force, and you jump into the consultancy world.
Yeah.
And I can still remember, first client engagement, I'm off, green as grass, going and doing this. And it was with a bank, and it was with a really senior set of people in the bank. And I'm going, Jesus, these guys are paying a lot of money for me as a Deloitte director to turn up. And I kind of know nothing. And how wrong I was, really, because the interesting thing was that's where they did look back, and they kind of looked at what I'd done, and they were really interested in terms of not the rank, but the experiences and what you'd actually, what you had done, and the kind of responsibilities you'd had, and the kind of breadth and depth of some of the very big command jobs and those sorts of things. So there was a lot of that softened that. I think if you're very hung up about, wearing rank on your pajamas, that's a bad thing, because you're just only going to be disappointed, obviously, because it's, that is just not going to work. And clearly, I mean, it does affect different people in different ways. I've done, as I'm sure you have, lots of conversations with people who are, transitioning out of the military into whatever they're going to do next. And one or two of those, I've had to kind of, be quite firm with them and make it quite clear, you need to think about this in terms of, what you're going to get next and the way it's going to be, and the approach you need to take and the attitude you need to bring to that job. Because, if you come to it with a view that I've got a ton of experience, I'm going to be hugely valuable to you, and you can't afford not to have me, well, regrettably, you're going to find very, very quickly that that's not true. on any level. There are organizations that, absolutely can afford to be without you and will be if you don't have the right approach right from the beginning. So I think it's a fascinating old world. We could have a whole discussion on that world of military transition for sure, but dragging you backwards.
Yes.
So early motivations. So you mentioned obviously from the age of 3 you were interested in airplanes. I mean, was that it? That was was just right. Okay, this is it. I want to be a pilot, and now I'm off and running. Or what kind of set you on that path?
So, I mean, that really was probably the old North Star for me. I was obsessed with it. But I think there were 2 other big influences really when I was a kid. My folks worked so hard when I was a kid. They own a little farm that they're so entrepreneurial. They've diversified on it, but the farm in itself is not kind of big enough to make a decent living. So they've used it in all sorts of different ways. And when I was a kid, I just watched them work literally 7 days a week. They had a garden center. They were farming. They had butcher's shops. They're just generally grafters. And I think one of the motivating things for me is it was instilled in me, not forcefully, but I think I just concluded that you get nothing in this world without hard work. And, at school, I was not the most gifted. I was academically pretty average. But once I'd got that kind of focus, that's what I want to be as a pilot, I kind of combined it with the work ethic that I was surrounded by. We didn't go on family holidays. We didn't get weekends off. Mum and dad were working 7 days a week. And that was tough at times, but it did instill in me that, the value of money and the value of hard work. And then kind of combined with this, maybe we'll touch on it a little bit later. My sexuality was a big issue because, you feel different. You feel, well, you're conditioned by society without getting too heavy, but you're conditioned to feel slightly inferior, if you stand out or you're different. And I had this kind of inner voice that makes it sound very grand, but it's not. But I constantly through my life have had this thing saying, it's probably from an insecurity, to be honest with you, prove them wrong. Prove them wrong. And so be that at school, be that at rugby, be that with the Air Force, be that with my business, it's kind of nobody's saying prove them wrong, but my inner voice seems to, even now at the age of 52, I still have it. I'm like, come on, Matt, come on, work, prove them wrong. You can do this. And it's a strength and a weakness. It's a hindrance sometimes because there's no reason why you need to do that. But at the same time, it is a drive and it is a motivating factor in a good way.
Yeah, I can see that. And I mean, it's very interesting when you look at from the family background and the very hard work type thing. I mean, I've done recordings before where I just talk about my own journey where my dad died when I was 3. My mum, therefore, was left as a single mum in the 60s, which was a really tough thing. And she inevitably had to work really, really hard and scratch a living, really. And, was in a place where, she worked very hard to get me into Christ Hospital, where I went to school, and as an independent school with a very good bursary system. And she didn't pay anything for my education, which is astonishing. Wow. Absolutely incredible. And without a doubt, I mean, it completely changed my course of my life. Yeah. And I think it does that kind of early stuff where it stamps on you, very clearly a different viewpoint in terms of your background and your kind of work ethic, drive, value of money, all those things that you mentioned. And obviously, as you said, you had a whole extra set of issues in there in terms of around sexuality, which we will definitely come back to. Just before we get into that, though, role models in the random, and obviously your parents you mentioned is setting you up there, but I always like to talk about role models and learn more about who you kind of really rate and why, and who are the leaders that have sort of influenced you the most and impressed you the most.
So I like people who kick against the system sometimes, almost like disruptors. And, if in the context as a kid, I remember watching Reach for the Sky with Douglas Bader.
Yeah.
And I know that's it's a film but it's based, it's obviously on a true life. But I love the fact that he had that passion to fly. And the authority said, no, you can't do that anymore. And he was like, no, I can. And he kicked against the system and proved them. Oh, there we go. Proved them wrong. And that, even as a kid, I remember resonating with me, maybe because I felt the underdog. And so I really connected with that just on watching a film type thing. But I think if I look outside of the military, the one person who, again, I really admire for what he's done is Richard Branson.
Mm-hmm.
How, if you put Richard Branson on paper academically, and he as a person, you say, he was a bit of a dropout at school. He wasn't academically bright. He didn't go to university. But he's the sort of person that has taken so many risks. He's disrupted markets. And he's got this real connection with people, not just his customers, but also people that work for him.
Yeah. I've heard that from lots of people that work at Virgin.
Yeah. And, he really does. And obviously, the bigger they get, the more difficult it is to stay on that personal level. But he really does seem to resonate with his customers, what they want, and how important investing in people, is. And yet he is acutely dyslexic. So he hasn't gone the traditional route, but yet he is taken risks and he's done exceptionally well. And for some reason, I kind of like that. I like that entrepreneurial spirit, and I like that risk taking and kicking against the system.
Yeah,
because he's got something else. His superpower, that neurodiversity of being dyslexic, that's his superpower.
That is a great example, really great example. Because I think, there are some people like that who just, you look at the success and you just marvel at what they managed to achieve. And as you say, the risk-taking element of that, which is certainly not everybody's cup of tea. The Douglas Bader one's quite interesting, actually. There was a guy, I'm not sure you ever came across him, but he was one of the relatively few black pilots in the Air Force in my day, who was on the Jaguar Squadron with me. He's written a great book called Average, which I love because that was his assessment at the end of his first tour. And I think sadly I had something to do with that. But he tells, he's a very funny guy and he tells some amazing stories. But when he joined the Air Force, he went into the RAF Regiment. And while he was doing the training for the RAF Regiment, the J course, he got frostbite and a very bad frostbite in his toes. And he actually, long story short, lost all his toes, all 10 toes. So all 10 toes were amputated. So he has the smallest shoes of many, many people around. But while he was, recovering from this, and he was at Headley Court, and he was in a ward, having obviously been operated on, they were trying to rehabilitate him because he clearly had to learn to walk again and stuff without his toes for balance and things. And I remember him saying to me that there had been I think he put it in his book as well. There was a guy in the bed next to him who was a pilot who, because Trevor was kind of pretty upset about, what am I going to do? And my whole career's ruined before it starts things. And he said to him, look, mate, if Douglas Bader can fly with no legs, you can probably fly with no toes. You want to try and look at that. And of course, ultimately, that's what he did. And he went from the Air Force, through pretty successful, tour on Jaguar Squadron. He went off and became an instructor on the Tucano. Left ultimately, went into the airline world and works for. I think he still works for British Airways.
Yeah, I flew with him. I flew with him. Lovely chat. He keeps reappearing in my career because I flew with him at Linton as a student when he was an instructor on Tucano. And then when I was briefly on Oxford University Air Squadron as an instructor, he came back to join the reserve. So I took him up on the tutor and did a check or something on him. And then we bumped into each other on short haul.
Brilliant.
What a lovely chat.
Yeah, he is fantastic. And I did joke with him because he was at the RAF Museum not that long ago, and they've got a kind of life-size cutout of him that is kneeling down in front of an airplane. And I said, Trevor, you really know you're in trouble now because you become a museum exhibit. He's a super guy. Mm-hmm. No, we digress. So let's take it back to the RAF though, because I'm really interested in when I tend to talk about leadership with lots of people on this. You have had, by virtue of where you ended up on 32 Squadron, you've had the opportunity to fly with the world and his wife of VIPs, the royals, a lot of very senior political figures and so on. And I appreciate, obviously, there'll be lots of things you can't say around this, but within the bounds of what you can, I'd just be really interested in what you learned from any of those kind of experiences in terms of their own, about leadership from the people that were in the back of your aeroplane.
So, first of all, I should say, what a privilege it was to do that job. A real honor to not just the royal family, but all the politicians. It really was quite something. And initially, you used to be when you first started, you were very sort of nervous, thinking, gosh, who am I flying today? And you'd look on the list and be like, crikey, they're letting me loose with these people. Imposter syndrome. But what did I learn about my own leadership, really, in a way, and my own decision making was, I guess, very quickly, they become just passengers. Obviously, you're very respectful and you're very mindful of who they are, but they're just as important as anybody down the back, literally. And I know that sounds a bit cliched and clipped, but I suppose in terms of leadership, we were young and we were young captains. So we were under 30 and we were taking these people around the world, and you learned very quickly that you had a lot of responsibility on your shoulders and you sometimes had to make quite difficult calls. And from their point of view, you don't appreciate the pressure, especially the politicians are under sometimes. Mm-hmm. The royal family were an absolute delight. Everything ran on rails, as you'd expect, in the nearest second. Although I once did do a diversion with the Queen, which was quite a big call on my part to divert with the head of state. That's a whole different story.
Yeah, I can imagine that would have been a big call. Yeah.
Yeah. Arriving at a different airfield. Yeah. Not so easy. But from the politicians, I think in particular, looking at it from the other side, when they get on the aeroplane, that time, and it was kind of before internet and SATCOM and stuff, that was a sanitized time for them. And so they would cram the aeroplane with their civil servants and special advisors, and they would use that for briefing. And sometimes they wouldn't even let you into the cabin. They were working so hard. And they literally, as soon as they get on board, the public perception would be they're sitting back, they're having champagne and caviar and, living the life, and they're not at all. That is a flying office for them. And they have got, 45 minutes to Brussels to get briefed. Close the door, no interruptions. So I think that's the thing that made me realize, gosh, these people, whether you like them or not, are working very, very hard in very, very stressful situations. And then when they go for the meetings, here, there, and everywhere around Europe or what have you, they start off with, say, an itinerary of coming back at a certain time. And that just rolls and rolls and rolls and rolls. And it makes you realize that you watch the 10 o'clock news, you see them at a meeting and what have you. That is just the superficial aspect of it. And they leave briefing papers and they are working very, very hard. But from my point of view, as the captain, you learn a kind of degree of certainly not subservience. It was this really difficult balancing act between respect and providing the very best service you possibly could. But you're still the captain and you still have to make command decisions. And when that door is closed, you are actually in charge of the politicians. And so, several times you would have to go and speak to them directly. And you develop this style whereby you'd be very respectful. You'd give them the facts. And sometimes they would push back on things like crew duty time in particular, or diversions because of bad weather. And they're under pressure because they've got to get from A to B, and you're now changing that plan. And they question it. And that kind of hierarchy gradient in the aeroplane, suddenly these people are important people and they're questioning my command decision. Why are we diverting? Why can't this aeroplane land in fog like the British Airways one can? And so you develop a style in your own leadership, which is firm, polite, forthright, and quite diplomatic. But also you've got to know where that line in the sand is, where you say, I'm sorry, sir, we will be diverting to Charleroi rather than going to Brussels today.
Did you ever have any instances where they really did push back hard on that? I mean, I think because you're right, that's the obviously nub of the challenge that you clearly face is you're in command. You're the one that has all the experience and the knowledge and knows where the risk boundaries sensibly lie. But, you know, they've got all that added pressure and actually don't have that experience. And I mean, I'll tell you a story in a minute as to why I'm asking the question. But were they always ultimately in the right place with that?
Yes and no. I mean, they were briefed by their, permanent secretaries and what have you, and you would try and work through their team first and foremost. But sometimes I had a couple of instances, one with a certain chancellor who might have become a prime minister.
There's a few of those around, but yeah.
There you go. I'm not being specific.
Yeah, exactly.
And yeah, I was taking the individual to the destination, and I'd warned them the night before that there was fog and that they might want to think again the train. And they were, no, insistent. So I filled the airplane up with fuel. And, I said, we're going to go, but we'll probably have to sit in the hold overhead the airfield. Yeah, it's no problem. We've got lots of work to do. And then when I made the decision to divert, I had to go and sort of speak to them. And, the question was made. Why we don't understand why we could have gone to Heathrow, and don't airliners land totally blind? So I did have to say to the permanent secretary or special advisor, these airplanes are old. The pilots are just as capable as the ones down the road, but we've got old airplanes.
Yeah, it's a technology issue. Yeah.
Like, indirectly saying, if you give us some cash and some new airplanes, we can do all of that. But of course, you don't say it, but you just hint and suggest.
No, the reason I mentioned it was, a very sad story where there was, when I was at the Royal College of Defence Studies, there was our Polish member who left. It was funny at one level because he arrived as a kind of a 1-star and left as a 3-star to go and run the Polish Navy. But he was killed on a VIP transport with a lot of other VIPs, including, I think, the president of Poland at that stage. Where and I don't think no one ever really got to the bottom of it, and I don't want to cast aspersions here, but at least part of the suspicion was it was exactly that. It was pressonitis, and pressure on the crew, which ultimately resulted in them, them crashing in poor weather, I think, and just diabolical. But yeah, I don't envy you that. I think the pressure was immense. I totally echo, by the way, what you said about work ethic. I mean, I've worked obviously over in some of my more senior roles, particularly with a lot with ministers, cabinet ministers, prime ministers, and you see the behind the scenes image versus the kind of public image are two very different things on either side. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's Labour or Conservative, or indeed the other politicians from the other parties. I mean, when I had visits out in places like Afghanistan, you see a different side to these individuals, which is really refreshing and good to see by and large. And some are ferociously clever, as well. I mean, incredibly clever, which you have to really respect. It's amazing.
I did notice actually. I did fly again. Some of the Labour politicians just it must have been coming up to the cusp of a general election just before they finished doing their ministerial work. And I flew them somewhere, and I saw them in a slightly different. They were in full election mode. They were like shaking my hand and chat. So you see all sorts of different sides of them.
Yeah, that always does play out very differently, doesn't it? When the moment you get into that kind of game, and it's and I think it's interesting. I'm sure the Ministry of Defence and all the other departments will be in this space at the moment where, of course, you're preparing for what looks likely to be a change of government. And then it's the whole different approach to, right, what do we tell the new government? Because obviously lots of the stuff gets, left, and we're not allowed to turn around and show them these papers and these decision papers. And it's some of that stuff, again, is very interesting to see the way the sort of inner machine works. But fascinating. Hey, change tack again. So you touched on this earlier on, but you were one of the first openly gay pilots in the RAF. You arguably were probably one of the first openly gay personnel in the in any branch of the services, and probably at any rank in the services as well. Because I mean, at the start of your career, obviously it was not only frowned on. I mean, I think some people have the view that we didn't tolerate it. No, it was illegal, and it was a completely different world in terms of the way that it is now. And it's amazing to see the kind of the journey that's gone on. But I'd be really interested in your kind of take about what it was like to work in that world, when it was illegal, and how you've seen that change over time. And that's obviously, I suspect it was a pretty difficult journey.
Yeah, it's just bizarre looking back, thinking about the old regime. But on top of that, how cold and calculating I was dealing with it. I suppose I had to be, really. But just to put things into context for your listeners, so 1994, 95 was when I started thinking of going into the Air Force and going through the recruitment process. And, first of all and foremost, I should say I've got no axe to grind against the Air Force because society was different back then. And the armed forces, yes, they were in lag, but they were kind of reflecting how 1980s or even 70s society was. So that's not a justification, but it's just fact, really. But they were very clear they didn't want gay people to join all three services. So there was an outright ban on you joining. If you were in and you were suspected that you were gay, you would be thrown out. They could court-martial you. They could even put you in military jail in Colchester. And that would mean no pension, no medals, no reference, life just destroyed, really.
Yeah, extraordinary, isn't it, when you look at it?
Yeah. So I've got a quote I'll try and remember, actually, from the Ministry of Defence, and I think it was published in 94. And it said, homosexual behaviour can cause offence, polarise relationships, induce ill discipline, and as a consequence, damage morale and unit effectiveness. So they were pretty clear. They didn't want gay people in the armed forces. So how did that affect me? I knew that, and I thought I was as strong as an ox. I will pull wool over their eyes. I am in denial. I'll deal with it later. All I want to do is get my hands on those fast jets. I was obsessed. And, I went for the interview and they asked those mandatory questions. Have you taken drugs? No. Are you aware of the policy towards homosexuality and what do you think? And I looked straight down the barrel of the gun because I was ready for it. And I said, there is no place in the armed forces for gay people. I lied. Bone-chillingly for a 22-year-old to do that, or 21-year-old. And I got the job. And I couldn't have been happier. And what did it really mean? It meant hiding everything from myself to a certain extent, but certainly from my family, from my friends, and all of the things that, the Air Force is amazing for: belonging, togetherness, identity, camaraderie. It was always yes, but for me. Yes, they do stand for all of that, but I always feel a little bit of an outsider. And really, for the first 3 years, it was not pleasant, but at the same time, I just got on with it because I was doing all this exciting flying and I was doing really quite well. And I got to Valley and it was all fine. But then it unraveled very quickly for me. And it was when I was on TAC weapons. And I think probably because I'd reached the limit of my ability generally. So my flying ability was, at its limit. And I remember everything in my head just unraveling. Thankfully, it's only ever happened to me once, and it happened really quickly. And the doubt in my mind, questioning myself, why have I got myself into this position? It's all your fault, Matt. You should never have joined. That internal dialogue really, really affected me big time at Valley. So I've got no axe to grind. It was wrong. I made a decision. I thought I was as strong as an ox, but I wasn't. And it eventually bit me. Really did.
So what happened then?
Well, as I was going through that course, I think a few things started to really get to me. As the workload increased, and it was immense, as you know and you remember.
Yeah.
Every trip, I would say it's a chop ride, but you're not far off. That pressure for a year, and the geographical isolation of RAF Valley got to me because I couldn't get away. The emotional isolation. So I'd met these amazing people like Mandy Hickson, right? One of my closest friends, but I couldn't tell her this inner secret. And I was like a pressure cooker dying to tell somebody, but I just daren't.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, that, because I suppose most people would reflect on you couldn't tell the system, but actually it's that wider not being able to tell anybody, because of course you compromise them as much as anything, I guess, right? It was presumably part of your logic for that.
You're absolutely right, Bob. I thought I don't want to be selfish. And I knew someone like Mandy would not drop me in it, but I did not want to compromise her position as an officer in the Air Force to breaking really Queen's regulations and the fact that she knew. So I just buttoned the whole thing up and just thought, just get through this course. It'll be fine. It'll all sort itself out when you leave Valley. And of course, it just spiraled. I got taken into hospital at Catterick with acute abdominal pain. And that funny story, army surgeon, obviously they don't get many people in the hospital at the time, sharpening his knife. He was like, oh, we've got one today. Great.
Nice. Practice.
Yeah. And he comes in and he goes, young man, you've got a grumbling appendix. And I was like, I don't think I have. And I challenged him and I asked him, said, I'm thinking we'll operate on you tonight. And I was like, I've had this for like weeks. Are you sure it's an appendix? And we had this toing and froing and I didn't consent to the operation. And I remember him saying to me, young man, don't tell me how to run my operating theatre. I don't tell you how to fly an aeroplane. Anyway, and it was actually a nurse who looked after me, and she had psychiatric training. She was an army nurse. There's hardly anybody on the ward, so she was just chatting to me for a couple of days. I'm convinced she rumbled me. She worked it all out, and I was dying to tell her because she was so compassionate and lovely. But I just couldn't because she was an army nurse. She was in the uniform. I just thought, no, I just can't take this risk.
Blimey. Yeah, it's a hell of a burden to be carrying around. I mean, we touched on just before we came on air. I mean, I think I know full well, obviously, having been through it myself, that, the flying training system and the pressure that induces and particularly if you're, as I was, earlier on, I mean, I had a terrible time in the early parts of flying training. It actually got better for me as I went, when I was a bit of a late developer, and I sort of found it easier as I got further through. But nonetheless, it is pressure, lots of it, and every single trip, every single day. And as you say, you're because there are constantly, when the moment you get good at something, they add something to it to make it hard again. And and so doing that with yourself kind of in a normal headspace is tough enough. I mean, doing it as you were carrying all of that must have been, just incredibly difficult. So, I mean, did this, obviously you carried this on through until you got onto 32, right? Onto the front, the multi-engine front line.
Yeah. So, I came a cropper about 5 or 6 trips before the end of Valley, and it was a relief, to be honest with you. And then I realized something had to change. So I kind of thought, well, I need to get to the big bright lights of the city. And I knew that it was unsustainable what was going on in my head. So my kind of halfway house was to get to London. And even though it was against the law, was to start leading a bit of a double life. So the only squadron inside the M25 was the Royal Squadron. So I went through all the hoops to get through there. And, I had 10 brilliant years there. It was just the most amazing job. Felt a little bit detached still. Started leading this double life to a certain extent.
And that must have been tough, right? I mean, that's not easy in itself to do that.
Yeah, you'd have thought it would have helped, but actually, a new paranoia sort of crept in, which was, I'm talking to civilian now friends who don't understand our system. And I was thinking, gosh, I hope nobody just inadvertently drops me in it, So so I started to worry about that. So, it was like a false economy, really, to be honest with you. So I stayed in the closet until actually after the law changed. So some veterans took the armed forces to the European Court of Human Rights, and quite quickly, and I think rather unexpectedly, it suddenly the rule got changed overnight. But I just didn't have the confidence that the oil supertanker of the culture. God love it. I mean, I love the armed forces. I really hope this doesn't come across as being negative, because I am proud.
No, I just laughing because I think it is an oil supertanker.
I mean, it really is. It's steeped in tradition. And that is the beauty of the armed forces, is tradition. But that makes it very slow to adapt, I think. And I honestly did not think it was going to adapt that much. And there was still a lot of homophobic banter around, even though the policy had changed. So, yeah, I stayed in the closet for about 9 months or so. And that's my only regret, is that I didn't have the courage and the confidence to come out when the law changed. I think sometimes we're not as strong as we think we would be in certain situations.
Yeah, well, I can understand that. I mean, not least if you've been, effectively in the closet, to use your words, for all that time. And that's then quite a difficult thing, because you've, apart from anything else, back to it's not just the system, it's all the people that know you, that have known you all the way through, who kind of, what's that going to do to my relationships with all these people? I can totally get that. I mean, that it must have been an incredibly difficult kind of decision to take or not take. In both ways, I can see exactly why you would end up being stuck with that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the decision wasn't really taken for me. By me. It was taken for me in a way.
Why? What happened?
Well, kind of indirectly. Well, not indirectly. In fact, directly. I got a phone call from somebody at RAF Northolt who chat, and then just basically said, "Look, there's a bit of a rumor going around about you, Matt." And effectively, I was outed. And when I got that, I was on the squadron, in the squadron building room. And, looking back now, retrospectively, best day of my life. Literally, that just changed everything. But at the time, oh my goodness, it was like an earthquake hit me.
Was it done kind of maliciously or with good intentions, or what?
No, I don't think it was good intentions. I think it was, it was probably low-level gossip and chitter-chatter around crew rooms.
Yeah, right.
But my friend phoned up, I think basically to give me the heads up and make sure that I was okay. But when I found out, it was kind of trying to explain to you or your listeners, if you imagine I'm holding my little secret close to me for 27 years. Nobody else has control over that secret apart from me. Whether that's right and whether that's wrong, I am in control of it. I am in charge of my own destiny. I've made a lot of mistakes on that road, but it's me. I am in charge. And then all of a sudden, I've lost control.
Yeah.
And that feeling of helplessness, of terror. I know it sounds really over the top, but
no, it doesn't. I absolutely can see that. If you're, I'm just putting myself in as close as I can to being in your place. I can well imagine that must have been a incredibly difficult to have got to the point where you think, do I come out, do I stay in, whatever, and then finding you've lost control of it. I mean, it's like lots of things where you've got something personal that you're holding quite close in. I had this in relationship terms. I've been married twice. The first time around, stuff was going a bit wrong, and you kind of get, how far do I go before I start telling other people about this? What are they going to think? Are they going to be disappointed in me? So it's very different, but I can kind of get the general thread of why that would be so hard, and so it must have been massively emotionally straining. That's for sure.
Yeah, it was, and I remember feeling sick to the stomach initially, thinking, "Oh my goodness, I think I'm going to throw up." and then feeling really angry, almost like instantaneously afterwards. Just go, how dare they talk about my private life? But this, probably one of the stronger feelings that came through during this was the feeling that people on the squadron who had taught to fly the 125, so it was a close-knit. And I just remember being dogged by this feeling that they'll think I'm a total fraud, that I've lied to them, that my integrity as an officer is out of the window. That what if he's lied about that, what else has he lied about? And my mind just went off on one.
Yeah, well, you catastrophize these things, don't you? I think that's the kind of human nature. You're going to look at that, and that's quite hard to keep under control if you're in that sort of spiral.
Yeah, it was difficult, and it all happened in the squadron building, on squadron duty, whilst I'm in uniform. It's just the worst time.
Yeah, nice. So how did you handle it?
Well, I felt incredibly emotional. You probably would have expected me to go in my car and go and speak to my family or friends outside the RAF. But my squadron boss at the time was Wing Commander Tom Barrett, who unfortunately is no longer with us.
Yeah, good friend of mine. I know very well from the Jaguar Force.
Yeah. Now, regardless of this, I got really good, he was my boss. I respected him, but I took him through the OCU. I got good friends with him. We all really respected him. For some strange reason, I just felt this compulsion to go and see the boss, which, when I think about it now in the cold light of day,
brave.
I'd known him for 8 months. The Air Force is not known for its compassion. And I'm suddenly thinking I've got to go tell the boss before I speak to my friends. Just bizarre. So I guess it's because I say we, because I've spoken to squadron people about him subsequently. And, generally we all trusted him hugely. And so, I knocked on his door and had the most embarrassing breakdown in his office. Poor Tom. But the way he dealt with me was pretty exceptional, actually, I have to say.
Oh, that's good to hear. I'm not surprised because I know him very well from he was on squadrons working for me actually in back in the day, and then obviously went off down a different path. But a super guy, and I mean, he was obviously, as you say, no longer with us, tragically killed in an accident, and riding a bike of all crazy things. You fly fast jets around, and then HS125s around, and then you get killed on your bicycle. I mean, it's just awful.
Tragic.
But so in terms of how it played out for you, and obviously Tom being very supportive is one thing, but then the broader kind of network across all the other people, how did that, did it unfold better than you thought it was going to be? How difficult, challenging, complicated was it as you went through that kind of, right, I'm now out, and do I want to go fully out, or did you go kind of, I'm still going to keep this on a kind of almost, to use the American phrase, don't ask, don't tell, or did you just go, right, I'm out?
No, I mean, I was out, but I did it sort of quietly. I didn't make like a big, massive fanfare announcement. But the system at Northolt looked after me.
Oh,
the station
good.
Commander and Tom, and they, I got like kind of invited to things with my partner to the station commander's house. I know that sounds very 1950s, but that was a big deal for the Air Force.
Yeah, who was it? Was that John Mars?
Yeah, and
another guy. I mean, so John Mars and I went through basic flying training together. He was he was one of, when I mentioned 18 turned to 9. He was one of the 9 that went, and he didn't go because of ability. He went at that stage because he was constantly airsick. And they went and sent him off to go and do the desensitization program. But a friend of mine to this day, and again, I'm not at all surprised. Super guy.
Yeah. So they basically, the senior leadership team looked after me, and I think I'm a real firm believer of this. I know this podcast about leadership, so maybe on that front, one thing that I am absolutely convinced about is emotional contagion. So it's often referred to as your leadership shadow. Is that people mimic behavior. It's all the survival brain of how we used to communicate. We'd startle when we see a threat, and it would mimic through the herd. Somebody yawns on telly, you all start yawning. Somebody laughs, you laugh. I am absolutely convinced that their amazing leadership, they're looking after me, percolated through that station.
I'm sure you're right. I'm absolutely sure you're right on that. I mean, interesting, the other way round. One of my other friends who I did a podcast interview with as a senior naval officer, he talked about this with his mood as captain of a ship. He said if he got up in a bad mood that day, then within minutes, the whole ship's company would be in a bad mood. Because and conversely, of course, in good mood, same the other way around. So no, I think you're right. I think they kind of those behaviors do matter enormously as a leader in terms of the way you conduct yourself. I talk a lot when I train people on this stuff. I say, you have to be super aware. It's all very well being authentic and talking about your authentic leadership style and being your authentic self, but you do have to be able to compartmentalize yourself. I mean, I've been in situations plenty of times when I've been dealing with something very difficult in the office, walked out of the office down to go and get a cup of coffee or pop to the bathroom or whatever, and walked past 10 different people who the first time they've seen me that day, that week, that month, whatever it is. And obviously, particularly as a reasonably senior guy, they all knew who I was. And my behavior towards them would have an enormous influence on what they thought of me, but also then kind of their general approach to Air Force leadership more broadly and so on. So I was acutely aware of that. And I think you're right. I think it really does matter how you conduct yourself and allow your kind of what you'll tolerate in terms of the things you see in the teams that are around you as well.
Yeah. And I read a little bit about this just because I'm quite fascinated by the process after I came out and how they really helped me. And, Professor Steve Peters of the Chimp Paradox book, he wrote, and they give us it in the airline, some of the bare bones of his teaching. But I think it's 7 seconds. He believes that verbally and non-verbally, which is crucial, that if you're in charge and you walk in and you meet either your team or your crew or whoever you're working with in that working day, 7 seconds, they've worked out whether they're going to work for you today or not.
Yeah, they form an opinion. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's one of the things I talk about quite a lot in terms of people forming judgments of you, because whether you like it or not, they do. And and I think it's very interesting actually for some of the younger generation now, and when I do a lot of work with Deloitte University these days, and when I work with their senior managers and directors, they're often finding dealing with the younger generation it's a challenge for them because they are different and they're challenging in all sorts of different ways. They've got different value set, a different approach to lots of different things. But interestingly, one of the things I kind of push back on them is I say, look, that's okay, but they need to recognize as well that they can be as opinionated and values focused and ramming that down other people's throats as much as they want, but people will form judgments about them, and they have to expect that they're not immune from that. That's the way life is, and I think it's it's a really important thing that again leaders need to be aware of, but actually also people in teams need to be aware of.
Yeah.
Because you can easily fall into the trap of thinking, well, I can say what I want and nobody can do anything about it. Well, no, they can't. Actively, probably, but passively, they certainly can.
Yeah.
And so how you then, whether you're building a team as a leader and wanted them to follow you and bring them behind you, your behavior in that sense really, really matters, because otherwise you get people doing the old consent and evade. They'll agree with you and then find ways to actually, actively not do what you really want them to do. Or if you're in the team, then people will find a way to just push you to one side or to give you jobs that you don't really want to do or that aren't going to advance your career and all those sorts of things. So yeah, for sure, I 100% agree.
Yeah, so I owe not just those two, but basically the Northolt senior leadership team. They obviously, must have had a meeting and gone, how do we deal with this? Because I was one of the first ones. But I've got nothing but pride of the Air Force and Northolt in particular, how much they scooped me up and helped me. But it wasn't, I have to say, I should qualify this. It's not Air Force wide. I've got a couple of friends who were at different stations that had very, very different reactions, to the point where they're pilots and they don't even want to talk about the Air Force, even to this day.
Yeah,
So we
that's
have
really sad, isn't it? Really
it is,
sad.
but I think it just shows the power of not just in the Air Force, but the power at Deloitte's or any large organization, that kind of middle to upper management tier. They're not the managers, they're the one above, the influencers. That if you don't get those people on side and have the right caliber and the right messaging, then whatever direction you want that company to go in, it's going to be very difficult if you don't get those people pulling in that direction themselves. And I just think I was very lucky at Northolt that I had two inspirational people who just looked after me all the time I was there.
Yeah, no, you're right. It is lucky. I mean, I've heard exactly that. I had similar experiences, and not just around the sort of the homosexuality issues and so on, but I mean lots of other things as well. Where you just see some people who, I mean, I think I do what I do now in terms of leadership development and the podcast and the kind of training I do and everything else. And I suspect you're probably in a similar place with some of the things you do on the back of what I think is a very good system of leadership training that the military, puts in place and offers you. And then taking that, as I did, to the corporate world, you've done it to the airline world. You've got those experiences that you bring together, and you can provide a very good sort of template and tips and tools, tips, techniques, etc., that you can help people with. But that, I mean, I'm very quick to point out that it's not a panacea. I would be the first one to say that military leadership is the system is good in terms of giving you some really good training. That doesn't necessarily mean that every leader that comes out of it is a good leader. Far from it. I mean, I've worked for some abhorrently awful leaders, and they exist in every walk of life. And I think that is a challenge. I think it's helpful to have it when you go into more senior leadership roles to have had some leadership training that puts you at least gives you more tools to put in your toolbox. And that's the primary thing for this. But I mean, if you're attitudinally not in a great place in terms of the way you support people, and you don't, fundamentally it's about emotional intelligence, isn't it? And self-awareness and all those sorts of things as well in terms of your own behavior. And that is, of course, getting more and more complicated with all the challenges that are there with new generation, with new ways of working, with new additional challenges that are around everything in terms of all kind of walks of life that we're in at the minute, which I think is just making it harder for people who are not empathetic, not emotionally aware, to stand out and be really capable. I mean, you mentioned pride. I'm going to take you to. We're doing this podcast. I mean, I'm sure that I'm hoping there'll be people listen to it well beyond June 24 when it's coming out. But I mean, it's coming out in Pride Month in the UK.
Hooray. Yeah.
And I mean, in your current world, when you look at the journey you've been on and where you started, and when you said it, at the beginning it was illegal and all the rest of it, I absolutely remember that when I was obviously a good while ahead of you, and in the 80s, when I was out in Germany. It wasn't just homosexuality that was, a problem here. It was, women in the military was a massive thing as well. If homosexuality was illegal, and we did lock people up for it in some instances, which is just extraordinary when you think about it now. But, women, if they got pregnant, were kicked out of the service and no opportunity to come back. And so we've gone on this massive journey that lots of people think, we haven't gone anywhere near far enough. There's still tons and tons of stuff to do. And I think that's probably true. But when you look across, in my case, 4 and a bit decades of it, you do see the kind of span of change, which has been really significant. But I'm really interested in your take from what you've seen in your own personal experience as to how far we've gone and how much, not just in the military now, I mean, societally, where are we? Where do we still need to get to?
So, just deal with the military just very briefly. I think they've done an amazing job at changing. I went back to Cranwell. The commandant asked me to do a talk to Cranwell a couple of years ago, and I've done a couple of UASs and what have you. The transformation is phenomenal. So first and foremost, well done, the military, because you've done it. You've cracked a lot of it. There's still things to do, but I think generally an amazing job. And if you'd have asked me when the law changed, where we would be now, I'd have said no chance, absolutely no chance. Generally, though, I think pride, it's June, some people roll their eyes and say, oh, there you go. They're the gays again. Why do we have to have a month celebrating it? And I think it's really important. We as a society have moved so far. But I think in Pride Month, it's a really good time to do two things. One is to celebrate overtly, because why shouldn't we? Why should we hide? Why should we, be shy? Why should we not just be as exactly the same as every other human being, around? So the celebration is overt, and it's there to remind everybody that 10% or whatever statistic you want to use of society is slightly different in that respect. So celebrate it. But I think it's also really important. Pride and all the changes have come from very radical people who have pushed the boundaries and make people feel uncomfortable. And historically, it's really important to reflect back to show just how far we've come. I mean, just what we've just been talking about is a perfect example of it. I'm not lamenting to a bygone time, but it's really useful for this generation, for the next generation, to reflect back and cherish what we've got. Just what we've just done recently with the D-Day commemorations.
Sure.
It's important to look back to make us appreciate what we've got right now. But it would be really naive to say that we've done it. We've got all that we require. Just look outside of, look in the UK, male suicide. Okay. The biggest killer of men under 40. I haven't got the statistics to hand, but those that are troubled by their sexuality or gender, it's off the scale.
Yeah, really high proportion of that, I'd imagine. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's absolutely horrific. There's constant, gay bashing, queer bashing. Go outside of the UK. Look at the countries where it's illegal in the Commonwealth to be gay. Look at what's going on in Uganda. Even in Europe, some countries are rolling it back. So, you can't. It's really easy to be complacent and say, "Oh yeah, we've got all our rights that we need," but it can be taken away so quickly. So, it's about educating the current generation about the past, how far we've come, but we mustn't be complacent. We really mustn't be complacent, because it can go very quickly.
No, that makes absolute sense. And I think you're right. I mean, you look at lots of other bits of the world where, these things are still enormous challenges, for sure. I mean, how does that work for you in terms of just what you do with an airline job? Because you're flying into places where presumably, that definitely still is, that's the case, right? So, and you're very public, so anyone that looks you up will be able to turn around and go, right, this is an openly gay guy. You're now flying into countries in the Middle East, for example. How does that work?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I just carry on. I'm not, I'm not over. I'm careful when I go into these countries. I don't not go. But I've been speaking to a client today, a bank, and I was asking them about them posting people to branches in countries where it's illegal to be gay. And they say, yeah, we do. I said, yeah, we're not doing Pride this month. We're doing a well-being celebration as a kind of covert looking after our people. So it's a real challenge. I think just the practicalities of my job, if I started saying I'm not going there, I'm not going there, I'm sure the airline would support me. But I feel just carry on doing what you're doing, really. But I just tone it down, obviously. But yeah, it's a dilemma. It's a problem. And that's why the Pride celebration, around the country I think it's really important. However, people want to do it and get employed, involved politically, perhaps, celebratory, perhaps, or as an ally. One thing that happened, which was lovely when I left Northolt, I knew I'd cracked it at Northolt, because my leaving party, I decided I'd go out with a bang. So I decided to hire a bar in Compton Street in Soho in London on a Saturday night. And it was a real melting pot of my gay friends, my RAF friends. And without telling anybody, I invited a very well-known drag queen, and the drag queen arrived at midnight, and you could see all the RAF guys looking across.
Double take.
Yeah, and the drag queen did a cabaret and got all the RAF guys up on the stage, and everybody stayed till about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's 3 o'clock in the morning, sorry. And I thought, actually, it's a bit like Pride. It's that kind of slightly overt way of celebrating. I think it's really important, because all we're craving for is normalization, really.
Yeah, and I think, and actually, full credit to you, because you've been on this journey from for a long time. B, you are now clearly doing a lot on the speaking circuit and those sorts of things in terms of increasing awareness, increasing tolerance, doing your bit to kind of add to that. I mean, it's interesting when you said you're invited by the commandant of RAF Cranwell to go back, and that in itself is unimaginable even 10 years ago. Probably never mind. So we really have come quite a long way in that space. But I think it takes advocates who are going to turn around and not just, you find you as you say, there are some trailblazers right at the beginning who had a really, really tough time with this and had to fight tooth and nail to get where it is. And you see that with kind of current things as well. But it does still take people like you to turn around and carry on that and carry on the torch. And as much as anything, it's an education piece, I think, for an awful lot of people that is missing some of the time, because you grow up, with a set of, as you said at the beginning, societal expectations. This is the way you're conditioned, and actually that for a lot of people, normalizing that and having people who are able to do that normalization is massively important, no doubt about it.
Yeah. And I think one thing, though, I always bear in mind, though, is I'd hate to be Matt Lindley. He's that gay pilot. I want to be, firstly, Matt Lindley's that pilot. Mm-hmm. He's a good bloke. He's a good instructor. He's diligent. He's hardworking. Oh, and by the way, he's gay. Mm-hmm. For me, that's really important, is that you've got to be good at your job. You've got to be good. You've got to be credible. You've got to be at the top of your game. For me, that's really important. And that probably goes back to that prove them wrong type thing.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And again, credit to you, because I think you've done a lot of that. I mean, in terms of your success in the things you've actively been doing, and certainly early on, and against all the odds, because as we talked about, flying training is tough at the best of times to get through it and get on to flying anything in the Air Force's sort of frontline fleets. Is a challenge. So you certainly did prove them wrong.
Thank you.
Talking of which, then I try and talk about highs and lows a bit on this, and I mean clearly I guess we can I can presuppose, although I'll let you fill the blanks in on some of the lows in here and maybe some of the highs, but. But before we get into that, when you look back now, and if you were able to turn around and talk back to school age Matt,
yeah,
with all that with everything that's happened and all the rest of it, what would you say?
So if I was say, like, I was sat in the school hall at age 15, thinking I want to be a pilot, but I had the doubt in my mind, I would say, don't worry about being different. Celebrate that difference, and celebrate. It's almost like a superpower. It's your fabulousness. It's good to be different, and that will help you in whatever direction you go in your adult life. But don't feel crippled by standing out of the crowd. It is actually something very, very good. So go for it.
Yeah, brilliant. On the highs and lows thing then, what do you wish with hindsight? Is there anything you wish you'd done differently? And if so, why?
Yeah, so I only have one. I'm funny, I know I'm doing the podcast with you, but I'm very much kind of a forward looker in life, actually, But if I do look back, the one thing that I do kick myself about is not coming out when the law changed. I had everything on my side, really. And I was surprised that I didn't have that moral courage to say, right, okay, this is going to be tough, but at last I've got the system on my side.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't dwell on it, but it's probably my only regret that when the chips were down, I not should have is the wrong word. I could have come out earlier. And I think it would have saved me a year of turmoil, in my head. That year was quite difficult, actually, because I was confused, very confused and troubled by the fact that I didn't have that extra courage just to do it. So that's why the coming out thing was a blessing and a curse. It wasn't nice at the time, but it forced the issue, really, to be honest with you. So that would be my only regret I've got, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was talking to someone only actually today. We were chatting about big decisions in life where often, and the chap I was meeting earlier on was saying, walking towards the fire is the thing that he, in this instance, should have done on a couple of occasions where it had caused him the most difficulty. And his big sort of learning point from that for himself was, don't stand back or walk away from the fire. If you know you've got to deal with it, just actually walking towards it. And I think, again, as a kind of point for people to take away and think about, that seems to be almost a universal truth. The amount of times that if I talk to people about tough decisions like letting people go, firing people from jobs, actually more often than not, if you delay, you make the problem worse. And actually all your team who are waiting for you to do it think, well, why didn't you do it sooner?
Yeah.
And actually maybe even sometimes the individual thinks that as well. And so often confronting the problem is definitely going to be helpful, isn't it? And I think that, but again, it's really difficult. I mean, you've got to play with all your personal emotions and commitments with other people and damage limitation, perceived or actual, is a real factor in all of this. What's your career high point, Matt? So,
career high point, it's got to be flying the Queen. It's got to be.
Oh yeah, well, that's a good one. I've never done that. I've met her a number of times, and there was always an enormous privilege. But flying her was not something I did.
And I did her Golden Jubilee fly past over central London, which will stick in my mind for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's lovely, isn't it? I led the Troop in the Colour Queen's Birthday fly past for her 80th birthday in 2006. As the 49 aircraft formation. So yeah, I know that's huge. I mean, I will never forget that. I got a lovely little letter from the palace. So it was terrific. So it was very special doing those kind of things.
Yeah, I do remember actually just lamenting back to that. I remember one of the nicest things, not just flying over central London and doing it, but I remember we were forming this massive formation over the North Sea. And it was the one where Concorde and the Red Arrows were flying. And I remember in the turn, we looked over our shoulder, we saw Concorde in the turn and the Red Arrows joining on Concorde.
Nice.
And that is literally in my head. And I was like, wow, we're ahead of Concorde and the Red Arrows. I was like a child. This is amazing.
Yeah, Concorde was a magical airplane, wasn't it? I lived at West Byfleet and in West London for a while when I was in the MOD, and we used to be right underneath the Concorde routes into and out of Heathrow. Right, and it's the only airliner that obviously people always looked at. Everything else was just noise. But people love to look at Concorde. It was very special. I never got to fly on it. I'd love to have had a chance to fly on it.
Not me. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah.
What about the low point then?
The low point, I think, probably was failing at Valley. I think that was difficult. And we all say, well, it was a relief because it was building and what have you. But for me, it was kind of the added pinnacle of a lot of mental health issues, I think, that was just hidden away. And talk about tuck it away, compartmentalize, deal with it later, all of those sort of coping mechanisms. But actually, when I failed that course, it all became real. And it wasn't just the calamity of failing your fast jet career, which many, many people have gone through, and it's very difficult, and you get over it. But I had this added dimension that it was like, oh no. So after all of that compromise, all of those lies, you're going to fail the course.
But I mean, interestingly, and this is something else I see so often is, one door closes, another one opens. I mean, because that happened, but then that created the route for you to end up going and doing what you did at Northolt, with obviously the support mechanism that was then in place when stuff changed and you were able to come out, all those kind of things, which might have been very different if you'd actually gone through. So it is interesting, isn't it? How, the path I often talk about forks in the road. And, and if you've gone down a particular fork, don't turn around and get a mile down the road and go, I wish I'd gone down the other fork. You didn't. You got, and you talked about forward looking earlier on. I mean, I'm a big believer in, I can see the benefit in having a degree of hindsight and looking back at the decisions you made and going, would I actually have made that differently if I'd had a chance, and what difference would it have made? But don't regret it. That's a different thing, I think, is turning around and going, bemoaning the fact that I didn't do it at the time, because you didn't. You life's changed. You've moved down that particular road, so it definitely opened up another set of doors for you, didn't it? And what a success! I mean,
and lifestyle, everything about it was a positive. London, little business jet, flying the Royals, and actually doing a job that if I had scraped through Valley, let's get real, I would have been a very average, fast jet jock. And actually, when I got down to Northolt, that job was much more suited to my ability. And I managed to do well there and got early command and became an instructor. And so professional advancement, even though it was painful, was totally the right decision by the Air Force.
Yeah. No, it's good. I mean, I think that's great that it worked out so well for you subsequently, and definitely in the no regret space. I mean, there's always two questions I ask at the end of these podcasts, and one of them is about most memorable event. I'm guessing you've probably covered that in what you said already with with London flypasts and flying the Queen and things. But what's the most difficult question you've ever been asked?
Well, I hate to keep going on about it because we have talked a lot about it, but I'm going to have to say, Air Force interview, are you gay?
Oh, yeah, that's true. I can imagine it.
Yeah. And I replied, no, there is no place for gay people in the armed forces. So bone-chillingly cold for that 21-year-old.
Yeah, although, I mean, I have to say, I can completely understand why you did that. I mean, if you're driven, to join and, you look at the kind of, even then, and probably the unfairness of the system and all the rest of it, then, why wouldn't you do that? And particularly if you thought at the time you could handle it and just, right, I'll just suppress all this and live a different life to be able to do what I want to do. And I mean, that's so I can totally understand why you would answer that in the way you did. But I can see that was probably pretty difficult. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Oh, wow. Matt Lindley, I have to say, this has been a fantastic interview. I think I always enjoy doing these with guests. I think we've done very different things in the Air Force over, and at different times and all the rest of it, but there's so much common ground as well. And I always, I love that the camaraderie element does stand out. And I think you are an absolute beacon for, where the Air Force and wider society is going in terms of, being able to turn around and take all the positives and just normalize it. As you say, it's not Matt Lindley, the gay pilot, it's Matt Lindley, the pilot, really nice bloke. And you've come over as absolutely both of those things in this, and, who just happens to be gay. And, I think what a great testament to you. So I'm hugely grateful. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for letting me come on and share my story and, wider thoughts. It's been brilliant. Thank you very much, Bob.
Absolute pleasure. Real delight. Thanks, Matt.